we start? The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted billions of lives and livelihoods. According to WHO, besides the virus devastating direct effects on morbidity and mortality, the COVID-19 poses substantial risk to human capital through disruption of essential services like life-saving, primary health, nutrition services, education, childcare, and community services. The crisis threatens to erase a decade of progress in human capital. Gains of human capital gains across the countries in the world. So the pandemic shows worrisome trends, such as slowdown in investment, productivity, employment, poverty reduction, as well as rising debt. So this panel will discuss different aspects of the human capital and will try to provide answers on how to mitigate the losses caused by the pandemic and also counter the pressing issues and challenges, such as restoring health, bringing children back to school, recovering learning losses, preventing the scarring of youth. We will also touch on a bit different aspect and the challenges that specific ministers face during the crisis. The panel will also include discussion on how important it is to increase the investments in human, physical and natural capital aligned with the long-term objectives of inclusion, resilience and sustainability. I have the honor to discuss these topics and challenging questions with the distinguished guests today. And I will first call Mr. Rolf Wenzel, the Governor of the Council of Europe Development Bank. The bank has been particularly active in North Macedonia and broader Western Balkans region, providing financing and technical expertise for social development projects. Mr. Wenzel had held senior posts in the German administration, including head of the Financial Policy Department of Germany's Federal Ministry of Finance, in which capacity he gained considerable experience in international fora such as the IMF, the OECD, the G7 and G20. Mr. Wenzel, unless addressed with decisive investments, the scars of COVID-19 shock on human capital and future productivity could become permanent. How critical role will have the public finance in restoring and building human capital as a central element in inclusive recovery?
Well, thank you very much and good afternoon, everybody. Let me start by saying that I would have loved to be there in Skopje today and joining the distinguished panelists for this very important conference. And I think it's indeed a good idea, an excellent idea, and essential to not only to talk about COVID, but also to look forward and to look at the time after COVID, because at some point, and hopefully rather sooner than later, we will have overcome the immediate impact of the COVID pandemic and move back to normal. But it will be a new normal, and we have to prepare for that. It will add to the issues that were already pressing at the time before COVID, and they will be more pressing after COVID. Now, I think it is fair to say that the COVID-19 pandemic has taken a significant human and economic toll on North Macedonia, just like with so many other countries around the world. So North Macedonia is not the only country that has to think about how to prepare, how to intervene in the period after the COVID pandemic. Now, while North Macedonia has managed the pandemic quite well, for example, the economy is expected to grow by about 4% this year, supported by increasing vaccination rates for the population, and inflation is expected to decline towards year end. It is indeed necessary to look forward and plan for the period after COVID. And I think that the conference program and this particular panel sets out the right issues, strengthening the competitiveness of the economy, preparing the country for the green transition, and also how to make better use of human capital and promote inclusive societies. Now, Mrs. Fitti, you mentioned that the bank, the CB, the Council of Europe Development Bank, is very active in North Macedonia. And indeed, since North Macedonia joined the CB in 1997, The CB has supported the country and its economy ever since by providing financing to help create employment and to maintain jobs in micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. And in addition, the CB has provided grant support to the government for the accommodation of migrants and refugees arriving in the country. Now, this said, and important as these projects are, the CB also stands ready to support the country in its efforts to strengthen the competitiveness of the economy and reinforce its social infrastructure. And I guess this is the overarching theme of this conference. A recent survey has shown that 1 in 4 North Macedonians believe that government investments should be prioritized towards social infrastructure. This comes second to industrial creating jobs. So government should invest more and prioritize in social infrastructure. And that means, and this is a good news for all politicians who are responsible and charged with social infrastructure projects, that it's a broad public support for investment in the social infrastructure. Now, from our point of view at the Council of Europe Development Bank, the following policy areas are key for increasing the competitiveness of the economy, for preparing for the period after COVID. And I would add that one should not hesitate, one should not delay, but one should prepare and start with the preparation now. The first thing that I would like to mention is the need for further investments in education to improve and, if necessary, expand primary, secondary, and tertiary school facilities. Statistics show that in North Macedonia, more can be done to boost further the ability of children to read and understand text by the end of primary school. Now, that seems to be a little bit of a detail, but it is important because it is important for kids to get into professional education, to get a job later on when they leave school. Now, if we take into account the possibly lasting impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated loss of classroom hours, education should become one of the priorities of government policies going forward. Also, recent statistics seem to show a relatively low number of school enrollment, which may contribute to increasing inequalities since it affects young people's chances of getting a well-paid job later on in life. Second sector for intervention, rather today than tomorrow, is the health sector. It is important to invest in the social infrastructure in the health sector because this is a sector where you keep a strong and skilled labor force and improve the quality of human capital. The CB, for example, has provided substantial financing for the rehabilitation of health provider institutions. And we know from our experience with similar projects in other countries where we are active that a well-endowed and adequate health sector and affordable access to it strongly influences people's decision about immigrating. And that brings me to an important point, and I think we should later want to touch on this point again, brain drain. In particular, young and well-educated people tend to leave their home country when they do not see any future prospects for themselves or their families. This brain drain phenomenon, which is a common feature for all Western Balkan countries, undermines the competitiveness of the country and its overall prospects, its potential for thrive in the period ahead. What is more, brain drain is not a circular process. Those who leave are not likely to come back. Now, to conclude, I would like to offer the following suggestions. Well, first, improve quantitatively and qualitatively education, including improved access for children and education facilities. Second, strengthen further the health sector by providing basic medical support for all. And thirdly, continues to strengthen the investment framework. Here, I particularly refer to the rule of law and the protection of property rights by providing access to financing for self-employed persons and micro businesses and attract foreign direct investments from the private sector. And in this context, I also would like to mention public-private partnership to finance public infrastructure projects. The CB, and let me conclude by saying that the CB stands ready to support North Macedonia in all the sectors that I have just mentioned. Some of our projects, for example, in the health sector, I believe could benefit from a stronger government commitment to implementation, but we are ready to support and to work together with our partners in the country. And coming back what you said by way of introduction, indeed, since Macedonia, North Macedonia joined the bank in 1997, we had a very strong cooperation, and we are ready to continue and to expand on that cooperation. Thank you very much for that introduction. And of course, I'm ready to continue, and I'm looking forward to the exchange of views with the other panelists. Thank you.
Mr. Winzel, thank you very much for your great overview of underlying how important it is to invest in here with us, we are the ministers of the human development sectors, which is really interesting to hear their views on what you explained before. And also, before we proceed with the Minister of Education and the Minister of Health, I would like to ask Mr. Bujar Osmani, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, if you could say more about the efforts you've been doing within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to strengthen the human capital, to strengthen the capacity of economic diplomacy, which at the end will contribute to the growth. The capacity of economic diplomacy is really important in the relations with the, it's really important for the brain drain that actually Mr. Wenzel mentioned, and also with our diaspora, relations with the diaspora, investments, remittances, etc.
Thank you so much. Let me first congratulate the Ministry of Finance for this timely conference, and I'm grateful for having the opportunity to be part of this panel with such a distinguished panelist and discuss about the role of diplomacy in the overall economic growth, and not only the indirect contribution, which is the most obvious, and I wouldn't like to focus there, but of course have to mention the role of our international positioning, our bilateral relations, international relations, the role of NATO membership in creating the unparalleled security, political, and economic predictability as an incentive for more economic growth, for more investment, for more planning and expanding of the investment, or the role of our EU accession process, particularly the implementation of Stabilization and Association Agreement, which we have signed back in 2001, 20 years ago, that has produced sort of a flawless trade union with the European Union, but not only the economic union, but rather the alignment with the EU regulations in regards to the rule of law, to establishing the preconditions for economic growth. And we hope that soon we will move from stabilization and association process into a negotiation process which will foster further this alignment with EU regulations, which are, of course, an important precondition for this economic growth. Let me just share with you a few parameters that we have currently at 40% of transposition of the EU acquis into our domestic legislations, which mean that 40% of the EU laws related to rule of law, related to economic and trade relations, are already part of our domestic legislation. We are the best country in the region in terms of meeting the economic criteria for membership, even comparing to the countries that have already started the EU accession process, maybe back in 2012, but also the political criteria. And the third level of this indirect contribution would be regional cooperation. And I have to mention here the Berlin process and the implementation of the MAPREA phase 2 of the action plan, including the 4 freedoms, which are part of the Open Balkan initiatives, but both initiatives are dealing with the same issues of defragmenting the regional market into and unleashing the economic potential of the region, which of course will reflect then in the domestic economic growth. But I wanted, as your question was, to put an emphasis on some projects that we deal as a foreign ministry and as a diplomatic network in outreaching and promoting the economic potentials of the country. Economic diplomacy was one of the 5 pillars of my mission, my mandate mission. To put it precisely, it was mission number 4, which is reinvigorating the MFA economic diplomacy. Beside good neighborly relations, EU, NATO, regional cooperation, and economic diplomacy is one of the 5 pillars of my mandate in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And let me just present to you some of the projects that we have been undertaking in the last few months. First was launching the project for sending economic advisors which have been assigned to our embassies to head and implement economic policies in different countries and regions. These are professional diplomats with economic background that has undergone through specialized, tailor-made training to present and promote our economic capacity. The first 4, as a part of this pilot phase of the project, have already been sent. One to Warsaw, from where, in addition to Poland, it will cover the other Visegrad 4 group. One in Munich to cover Germany and Austria as one of the biggest trade partners and investors in North Macedonia. One in Ankara, dealing with Turkey, and United Arab Emirates in Abu Dhabi. Of course, we sent to FAO and WTO in Rome and Geneva, and the next phase would be Amsterdam and Chicago to cover Benelux and United States. Their main task is to present the overall economic potential of Republic of North Macedonia. By that I mean as an attractive destination for foreign investment, promote the country as an appealing tourist destination, and to promote our export potentials, and promote North Macedonia in general as an economic and political brand that is part of our modern society. The second pillar of this economic diplomacy activity that we are undertaking is integrating the diaspora into our overall development, particularly our economic growth. As you know, Republic of North Macedonia is a country with a large, relative to the population, and widespread diaspora. They are successfully integrated, and they have made an impressive success in countries of their residence, and they represent a huge potential with their knowledge and economic power that can contribute significantly to the country's economic development. And here we have 2 projects. One is by sending special diplomats. We call them diplomats for diaspora, and we already sent them 2 of them, one in the United States and one in EU. They will be particularly dealing with the diaspora, mapping their demographics, mapping their characteristic educational, occupational-wise, in order to identify the potential so we can integrate and include them into our short-term, mid-term, and long-term development plans. And the second part of the second project within this initiative is the M-Card project, which means designating or identifying the most successful representatives of our diaspora all over the world in different sectors, and making them part of the network that will contribute in our development. And of course, the third pillar of this policy is using the network of honorary consuls. We have revised completely the concept and the guidelines for sending honorary consuls, and sort of incentivizing them and pushing them to promote the economic potentials of the of the country. I think the role of economic diplomacy is important, and we are trying as Ministry of Foreign Affairs to focus more on promoting the potentials, but also in the aftercare of the investment. So therefore we have proposed to the government a plan for integrating the promotive aspects of our economy and integrating them within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, having in mind the potential that we provide with the network of 58 diplomatic and consular representation, and also professional diplomats who have been trained all their life to promote the country and also to establish the necessary contacts for attracting investment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister Osmani. I believe that these activities that you are doing within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will have effect on attracting the investments and also in improving the relations with the diaspora. Thank you so much again. Now I would suggest that we hear the testimonials of the medical director, Milena Stevanovic of the University for Clinic Diseases, and Anita Angelovska, the director in elementary school, in order to see what they are saying about the lessons learned and how they faced with the challenges that the COVID pandemics brought.
Година и половина от почетокот на COVID.
For half, 1 year and a half from the start of the pandemic gives us enough time and space to overview the experience we faced, and that we have strong sides but also weaknesses that we need to overcome. The main challenges that were faced by us at the very beginning was the fear, professional fear from the unknown disease, and how much we can help ill people and our patients. On the other side, we had personal fears for the personal health and the health of our families. When you are an infectologist, this second type of fears are overcome very fast, but the professional fears remain in the wish to help as many patients as possible and to give the better health care for the patients. We understood very fast that our own experiences will be most appreciated and would help us the most also all the time while working and taking care of the patients. So we read and we monitored every written word, every knowledge available out there in the world for the COVID virus. So we learned a very important thing, that it's not always that the material things or instruments or provide bigger, greater health care for our patients to reach diagnostics. The human factor, the doctor, the nurse, assisting personnel, a big hole that is necessary for treating a patient, especially in a time of pandemic. We learned that a team investing in human resources is probably the greatest strength of a health system. To live in time of pandemic is a challenge. To manage the educational process is more than a challenge, because you work, you manage people that educate other people. There is no recipe for that, but in such situations, one should be dedicated to the maximum and to be resilient. We learned that the consumers of our services, our students, can be reached in different ways, and In that context, I mean the digitalization, it became our priority at the time. We tried at the very beginning of the pandemic, we provided a system, we created a system, bilingual platform in our schools. We used 2 languages for teaching, and we created materials that would benefit the students. Gradually, we strengthened the human capital, the human resources. We formed teams because we needed to react adequately, adjust, and we provided any type of support. Students functioned online previously with the rest of the students, but this type of communication with the teachers was something new, and we resolved the issue very fast. We helped each other, and we gave good examples. It is very good that good practices are shared and teachers to learn from one another on a horizontal scale. They were not neglected because students needed to understand that we are here for them, that we are working constantly in realization of the plan. We did everything possible to provide availability to all. We provided equipment for the teachers with laptops to provide also internet connection to provide access to the teachings, and also vulnerable categories of students to have equal access. The crisis taught us that we need to strengthen the capacities of teachers. Our school is one of the good examples that showed how one should react in a time of crisis, how to function. Something that no one could predict. Everyone wants to be healthy and alive. We invested in the mental health of the employees and students. We provided psychological support for them, and a challenge were the students with disabilities. We provided sensory room and smart devices in each of the rooms so that we could safely pass through this period.
Can you please provide one follow-up of these short testimonials, and also speak more about the lessons learned from the previous waves of the COVID, and how those would help in making the health system more resilient to future shocks? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Commending first the Ministry of Finance for the excellent organization. This is an excellent forum, a place to hear the experiences of several sectors, all affected by the COVID crisis. What we have learned, what is something that we can learn from now on, that does not depend on us. We can see the lesson learned so far, what we witnessed. I think that there are still a lack of information and about the questions how this pandemic happened to the world, or whether it is a single one-off event or it will be a series of events. And we were not aware of the risks previously. That is something that we will research from now on. One thing is sure, vaccines save the world, and it is confirmed with every new vaccine that, starting from Edward Jenner and so on. What are what is the unknown? This world has marked economical and technological progress, changes, changing of governments all around the world, progress supported with the increase of despite that development, there are many parts of the world that remain behind. One of the reasons is that maybe the progress is unequally distributed around the world, and all tendencies cannot be applied everywhere, whether it is demographic change or the environment or technological development. Considering all these things, it is more than probable that, in a way, we are conquering territories of types, varieties that are the hosts, pandemic potential, and the transfer is easy from one type to another. And this is that has not been confirmed even by many of the research institutes that are doing the research led by the United States. They are not with one opinion what is the knowledge, whether the virus originates from laboratory condition or laboratory incident, or it is transferred from animal to human. And this is a topic to be worked on in the following period, and from the knowledge from that research will be implemented as a strategy for the development of different segments. And concretely about the issues that the lessons learned, many analyses from renowned institutions, the World Bank, the Office of the European Union, that we reconfirmed that we have identified well the weaknesses of our health system, and it was visible during the crisis. That's how we scaled our measures. We invested where we thought it is most necessary, in people, in their in the medical staff, in the part of infant deaths, a serious aspect of our health system, and we started a segment that covers reforms of the primary health to better address the chronically ill. That the crisis confirmed that are the main risks to the health system. That's how we dimensioned the reform, early detection and treatment of the chronically ill, according to the policies for easier access to health services. Another learned lesson, the need for frequent and coordinated work and coordination of all institutions, not only within the health sector, but all over the country. Good coordination among different institutions within the health sector and among different institutions and segments within the government contributed to have good management of the crisis. I must emphasize that one of the main partners in the managing of the crisis was World Bank, with the loan and the support, without which it would have been hard to manage the situation, especially taking in consideration the flexibility they showed us along with the development of the situation and the pandemic. And it was not always during the crisis that we needed one or other things. So in general, this cooperation, that support that we receive from the financial institutions is something that, as a system, if it is implemented in the health system, not only in our country, but all over the world, of course, considering the overall experience so far, will strengthen the health systems.
Благодарам, Vinko. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. We will have the opportunity to discuss further with the colleagues from the World Bank, which are here on the panel today. But first, I will ask Minister Carovska, Minister of Education and Science, what are the main challenges that the education system has been encountering during this pandemic, and what are the actions that the government is undertaking to mitigate the impact of current costs and the failures of the pre-COVID system as well, to turn recovery into the real opportunity to ramp up the quality of the education in the country.
Благодарам, Нина.
почитувани копаналисти,
dear co-panelists, representatives of the institutions. I'm really honored to be part of this panel dedicated to human capital or human potential. This is a topic that has been discussed both in the developed countries and in developing countries as ours. But I have to point out that in countries as ours, where only half of the human potential, or today's students are expected to be productive in our lifetime, and when we have more young people who want to leave the country than those who want to stay here, we both need to adopt policies, but also to invest in the young people, because only with this we can envisage and plan any growth in any aspect of society. Therefore, as a government, as a Ministry of Education and Science, together with the Ministry of Finance, we intensively work on the improvement of the education, both program-wise and infrastructure-wise. At the moment, if the funding system of the education does not yield the expected results, it means that we need to make changes. The Minister of Finance also believes the human potential to be a very important topic, but also the Ministry of Finance also invest in this. That's why we have an increased budget of the Ministry of Education and Science. If 85% of the investments for education and science are spent for wages, it means that we have a non-optimized network. So 70% should be on wages and 30% should be dedicated to didactics and all the remaining aspects necessary to develop education. I believe that we're going to be able to achieve this target because we have increased cooperation with the UNICEF, the World Bank, and the Ministry of Finance. We have a budget. The strain on budget is real, but this can pay off in the end. If we've invested in quality education 10 years ago, the COVID crisis in 2020 would have been we would have been affected with the crisis more prepared. We were trying hard to adapt to the needs imposed by the crisis, but we were pressed for time because we weren't prepared beforehand. This is a global challenge, but in our country, the COVID crisis also provided opportunity to have the focus on the education, and it showed why investments should never be decreased on society. On the contrary, they should be increased so that we can have a fast response by all sectors and to establish resistance systems that can be easily managed in such a critical times. So the COVID crisis yielded the opportunity for digitalization, to have teaching staff who were able to provide the teaching and the education, and to be able to provide the classes in such a short amount of time, and all the teaching staff and the students to be adapted in such a short period of time. If we told the teachers that 2 years ago that they were supposed to do this in such a short amount of time, they would have said that it would be impossible, but we managed to do that. That's why we shouldn't underestimate the benefit coming from the COVID-19 crisis. So not only the digitalization, but also the change of the concept of learning. The COVID situation also proved that the students should be more adaptive, that they need to practice what they've learned. And this has been shown by all the international tests and international analysis showing that our students underachieve compared to this international average. For the first time, we have introduced these international standards, outputs, etc. That would be we could compare with. So we are working on a contemporary, modern education, resistant education, and adaptive system. We've worked on this in the past COVID-19 period, but we need to work on that in the coming period, and this should be our national commitment regardless of the specific government or the specific minister in charge. Thank you, Mila. Congratulations on the successful start of the school year, and I wish you luck in the reforms in the future.
Education practice in Europe and Central Asia in the World Bank. He is responsible for leading the work program charged with developing the concepts and strategies for education sector policy at the World Bank and supporting country programs as well. Mr. Patrinos, why countries should invest in human capital and protect hard-won gains from being eroded, as we mentioned at the beginning of this panel? What would the bank advise for transforming education in North Macedonia during and after COVID-19? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Would have liked to have been there in person, but thank you for this opportunity. I think the gains on human capital prior to the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic were evident in Macedonia. We saw the improvements in education outcomes from the limitations that previous speakers have made, but the improvement was clearly there. COVID comes along, and like in every other country, education systems, the economies were locked down, the schools were closed, and this affected learning. And we suspect from other countries, and we predict for North Macedonia, a decrease in learning outcomes. So the importance of human capital and education is clear because of the improvements that investments in people make in their productivity, in their ability to address challenges and changes in economies, the skills that are transferred from the education system translate into economic growth for countries, into increased opportunities, into the ability to reduce poverty, to reduce inequality, and to promote people's ability to improve their economic and social well-being. So the school closures and the limitations on education clearly will affect this generation of students, and it's important to acknowledge this and to address it clearly and in terms of what is important. Already Mr. Wenzel and the Honorable Minister of Education mentioned the importance of maintaining efforts on education, for example, protecting the education budget, increasing spending, and as the Minister said, focusing on those aspects of the education system that will improve learning outcomes. I think the importance of reopening schools, and I would want to congratulate the government of North Macedonia for taking this action. It is possible to maintain physical presence in schools safely. Also, the government quickly acted to put in place the distance education response during the first wave of the COVID pandemic. In addition, the importance then is to recover the learning that was lost during the school closures, and in fact to accelerate learning for all segments of population, but also for those most likely to have been affected by the school closures. And in all countries, those populations are the ones from poorer backgrounds, those with less access to technology, and the ability to learn on their own. Second, and already mentioned several times, protecting the education budget. And of course, I would second the minister's comments on focusing on those aspects that are more likely to improve learning outcomes. We do need systems, assessment systems, to know which students have suffered the most, which students have fallen behind, so that the teachers can address those needs directly. And there are several things that have worked during the pandemic that are worth mentioning. Tutoring, one-on-one tutoring, whether in person if it's safe or by technology, has been proven to reduce learning loss during the pandemic and is a proven strategy for improving learning and accelerating learning going forward. I would also focus on targeting programs to those populations that are falling behind, disadvantaged populations, those with less connections. I heard from the previous panel the efforts that are being made to improve digital reach of homes, and this will also allow people to continue learning in the event that there might be another need to close schools for temporarily, but also to put into effect some of those lessons, positive lessons from COVID, which again the minister mentioned, people's ability to adapt to situations and to use practical tools in their learning. And this goes to the fourth and final point that I would make, is that countries need to prepare for the future by building the resilient systems, meaning not just the digital response that will be required in case of school closures, but also to take advantage of the technology so that people can have a more hybrid learning opportunity, but also building resilience into the system so that future crises won't lead to unplanned, unmanageable school closures that will affect learning for the populations in the future. We've seen from the experience today, and we've seen predictions and actual learning losses in some very high income countries. Despite the technological solutions, there will be learning loss. It will be targeted, affecting mostly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And it's important to invest in those populations, because not only will they lose learning during the pandemic, but this will affect their educational careers and their future labor market careers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrinos. Ms. Irena Stefovska, Minister of Culture. Culture in time of COVID-19. Is it a culture of distance? Has the culture been put on a breathing machine? How to support the workers in the field of culture and the artists in time of world's pandemics?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this forum. And let me say a few words about the culture during the time of pandemic. Dear sirs, dear madams, still practicing social distance, wearing masks and using hand sanitizers, still facing fear and dilemmas about both the virus and the vaccines. This has been our daily routine for about 19 months. Sufficient time to inflict change in our lives. The wounds are too deep to be expected to become scars soon. Cultural professionals, musicians, artists, etc., say that the pandemic will not redefine culture. And they are fighting violent attempts of the virus to get us used to a situation where one can live without culture. In global terms, this pandemic has reduced communication just to a level sufficient for us not to start talking to ourselves. Last year, when we all wished and believed that this situation would be short-lived, culture found its way to reach people, primarily using internet tools. However, work from home could not be an option for culture. Culture does not communicate with machines. Culture via internet play its role, but this has taken too long. We are all passionate to consume culture as real audience, not in pyjamas. Culture in pyjamas, this is an illusion. It's far from a living culture. Last summer, and particularly this summer, we got the necessary cultural event. However, culture at the time of fear of touch could not be a real culture. We cannot foresee the consequences when we do not see the end of pandemic. And I have been the Minister of Culture for a year now. Almost my whole work in office has been influenced or conditioned by the new normal. That is likely the reason I constantly seek sequences from the movie Equilibrium in my mind. A world without emotions, without compulsory daily dose of indifference towards people and towards culture. A world without the works of Mozart, Da Vinci, Shakespeare, a world without Broadway, Louvre, Bolshoi. What kind of world is that? Most probably, we are fighting an immune response of the nature which protects itself from the man. Wenko, you will tell us. But the fight must not create a new world where culture will be a privilege of the well-off above all, just like the vaccines used to be. Economic recovery is our top priority, but our staying alive is above all. The healthcare and the cultural sectors stand hand in that battle, in this battle. The body seeks remedy, while the remedy for the soul is culture. It's true that the best works are created in most difficult times. It's true that silence is the greatest ally of creative people. However, this is painful silence that has taken too long, and it seems as if it was erasing each letter of the word humaneness or humanity. The government and the Ministry of Culture provided economic aid packages for cultural industry and cultural operators. Nobody says that this aid was sufficient. At the same time, the employees in national institutions, cultural institutions, have received the whole salary regardless of the quarantine, rotations, the curtains being down and the stages being mute. The principle of solidarity is a value that I called everybody applying with their own projects at the annual call for support in culture to adhere to. I urge all companies that have corporate responsibility and social responsibility, of course, and all individuals to give a hand to culture, because this time of pandemic of corona will come to an end one day, I do hope. Culture was the first to suffer. We must not let it be the last to recover. Without culture, our mental health is at stake. At this exceptional forum, I would like to extend my gratitude to all cultural professionals, artists, musicians, etc., for their innovativeness, passion, their bravery to make an outdoor stage from every open-air space and to keep culture alive, even from distance. In various sectors, people can be replaced by robots, machines, but culture belongs entirely to the human. Considering this, I do not fear, because we have, let me say, huge human capital which we must invest in with mutual effort. The European Union has also analyzed the consequences of the corona crisis on culture, consequences that the European Commission referred to as devastating, stating that the society might be able to live without cultural life for some time, but if it lasted longer, eventually there would be nobody to revive culture. This life involving masks, wearing, social distancing, and fearing touch has changed us. This is a global agony. Therefore, we must help each other. Without solidarity, we will not get out of this pandemic as better human beings. On the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stefovska, and thank you for giving this emotional note and also put a bit of humanity on this discussion today. Okay, Mr. Goran Milevski, Minister for Local Self-Government, could you speak more about the responses to COVID required not only actions from the central government, but also the actions that have been undertaken by the municipalities to mitigate problems caused by the pandemic?
Thank you for your announcement, for the invitation, for this successful organization. Dear participants, dear co-panelists, in this ambitious agenda of the conference, the focus is on the human capital. Without human capital, all policies are futile. Therefore, at the end of the conference, I believe that you will agree with me. We need to put care of people, their health, their subsistence and education should be put on the top of the agenda so that the human capital can provide the implementation of all policies. Bearing in mind that the municipalities are responsible for the implementation of above 70% of policies, the local authorities and the local self-government is very important in the provision of services to citizens and to the quality of life and sustainable development strategy of the government 2026 opted for expanding the competencies of the municipalities and improvement of the funding system. The emphasis was put on the enhancement of the capacities for provision of social services, digitalization of administration services, better preparedness and organization for the provision of community services to enhance the role of municipalities in response to crisis. In the programming process, we primarily took into consideration needs of our citizens, bearing in mind the consequences of the health crisis at a regional and global level. We still have differences that affect the quality of living. The health crisis caused by COVID-19 pandemic even more so highlighted these differences, even though these basic services, primary, secondary education, culture services are financed by the central budget. The development differences between rural and urban areas are reflected on the quality of life and the ability of citizens to fast adapt to new conditions. The health crisis mobilized the municipalities, but because of the response being on the central level, the municipalities had difficulties to provide fast responses. 40 municipalities responded that for this purpose their expenditure was lower than 200,000 euros. We got support from facilities who could provide international funds. It is necessary in the coming period to establish a functional prevention system, early warning system, response and recovery from natural and specific disasters in which the municipalities will participate in based on specific responsibilities with allocated funds. In the coming period, the municipalities need to decrease their expenditures on areas that are not connected to the crisis and to focus on critical local services. The measures and activities in accordance with the horizontal program should be focused on post-crisis recovery, apart from the prevention and protection of the citizens from fast expansion of the disease. Having in mind the health crisis consequences, it is of key importance to work on a conducive economic environment in each local self-government unit. Therefore, we need increased cooperation between the local self-government units vertically with all authorities, but also with all citizens. Also, we need to pay particular attention to human capital development, to encourage inter-municipal cooperation, which is not satisfactory, and to improve the planning regions. And within our competences, the local self-government units should continue to promote local economic development through the digitalization, communal infrastructure, development of economic zones, urban planning, landscaping, of course, through the adequate financial support of the central government, but also more sustainable funding system of the municipalities that will eradicate or mitigate the differences between the rural and urban areas and the city of Skopje and the other municipalities.
Human capital is really high on the top agenda of the government of the Republic of North Macedonia. The government is really committed in investing in human capital quality, also improving the human capital index, which is measured by the World Bank. In that way, the government committed on working on a human capital strategy, which together with our partner, the World Bank, is a product that we have been started to work on. So, Mr. Tsarovska, can you explain a bit more about the strategy, its concept and expectations?
Yes, madam.
Thank you.
As you mentioned, the government has the priority human capital, and we work on that together with the World Bank and the governmental team of experts that participates in this type of a strategy. It's not only important for the future of the country, but also I think that it will provide us provide the institutions to be able to talk about joint activities and connect all policies that have as objective improvement of the potential, the human capital potential. What is also important is that this strategy should be based on facts and arguments, and all the numbers that are available should be put available to the World Bank and for us to prepare an evidence-based document. Also, an important thing is that the institutions should own this document. The institutions should produce the need for policies which have the final objective investment in human capital. And the third and most important for the life of this type of strategies is that it should not be timely limited with the mandate of a government or authority. It should provide political will for further investments in all sectors that tackle human capital. And that is why I think that together with the support of the World Bank and involvement of all stakeholders, we will manage to have this national strategy for human capital investments and to connect the institutions who are competent for this type of investments. Thank you, Mila.
Welcome to this conference. Thank you very much for joining us being here with us in person. Yamila Rigolini is a program leader for human development. in the World Bank's Western Balkan. His areas of expertise include social protection, human development, labor markets, and Yamile is working with our teams on this strategy, human capital strategy. Based on what Mila said before, how to sustain and further advance strategic policy, actions for human capital development beyond political term of one government. Thank you, Emil.
Thank you, Nina. You raise a very good point, and I think I would like perhaps to extend the thinking a little bit about human capital and politics in general. Politics is very good, creates competition. Really, you want, through competition to achieve better outcomes. But in human capital, sometimes politics can also be a little bit an enemy because of three big factors. The first is human capital takes a lot of time to realize. So, government lasts 4 years, 8 years, 12 if you're lucky, but returns in kindergarten, you need to wait 20 years before you see them in the labor markets. Addressing non-communicable diseases, takes you 10 years before you start seeing a difference. So the problem is that human capital cycle is much longer than the political cycle, and that generates sometimes incentives to invest in other things because you don't see the immediate returns. Also in the long term, it's exceptionally powerful. The second is human capital to be improved requires bold and big reforms that are sometimes not popular in the short term. Think about consolidating hospitals. Then you need to travel twice as much. You have better care, but at the beginning, what people realize is that there is not an hospital nearby, you need to travel further. The same for schools. Or think about revising social protection. You may have people with Mercedes who receive social assistance. This is bad, but if once you start means testing, you're going to have pressure not to do it. So you need to overcome big obstacles to reform human capital, and sometimes that's politically very challenging, again, because the results are going to be shown a few years from there. And the third point is what you mentioned is the need for continuity. I think, in a way, technically, very often, what to do to improve human capital is not necessarily a very political decision. You need to consolidate hospital, improve social assistance, improve the support to teachers and their qualification, the school management. But often what we see is that new government comes and just to show they do things differently, they want to undermine what the previous government has done, even if it was good, and start from scratch. And this starting from scratch is very dangerous because each time, rather than building upon what exists already that is good, you just want to take a new direction. And continuity of politics in human capital, of good politics, of policies, good policies, is very important. So this is why I think a strategy is really a powerful instrument. And I would like to stress this is not a World Bank strategy. This is a strategy of the country prepared by government. We just, supported with technical documents and with facts and analysis, but the strategy will be prepared by government. This is why a strategy is important, and it shouldn't be one government strategy. It should really be as inclusive as possible so that, when politics changes, people in government change, the policies continue, and there is a broad understanding of which reforms need to be done. Also of the fact that some of these reforms may not be that popular in the short term, and slowly the country can really build towards better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you. Thank you for underlining the need of continuity of the reforms and the process in building of the human capital. And I would now turn my question to Mr. Filipče. Can you say what are your expectations regarding the human capital strategy that we discussed about in terms of outcomes, deliverables, financing, effectiveness? Is it a process of reforms in these sectors high priority on your agenda? Of course it is, but maybe you can just reconfirm.
Yes, I think that we've already started, and allow me to say that it is my impression that we had a successful start. because the investment that we took in both improving the capacities at the level of maternal and neonatal health with significant results. I think we are one of the rare countries in the world that have this significant percentage of decrease of neonatal, perinatal, maternal mortality. And this was a comprehensive approach. Then the investment that we are doing to keep the young doctors and nurses in the country. We have this brain drain challenge, which is typical for the region. And certainly to improve the conditions and the salaries for work for the health workers gives us the opportunity to say that it is my personal impression that we are on the right way. Because the politics are inclusive, meaning that we are actually hearing the voice of everybody who is directly concerned of the policy that we meant to implement. In this way, we hear the real problems, we very frequently hear the solutions from the people who are really affected from a problem or an issue. So, and the whole crisis and how it started, how it developed, and what's the level currently, right now, has proven that it was a right decision that we invest in the human capital. We could not have handled the crisis properly not without these benefits at the very beginning of the crisis. And when I say benefits, I say for the reaction of the people who were directly involved into managing of the crisis. So I fully agree that the strategies and implementation of the strategies and the action plans who are coming out of the strategies are the keys to strengthen the sectors who are now proven to be the key sectors in all of the countries, and this is the health, the education, the social sector, but I also think the strategies and the action plans, and I also think this is the key, should be realistic in order to know where we go, in which direction we go, what we measure as a result in the meantime, and then at certain point of time we are able to say, okay, we have some results from our strategies.
Thank you, Vinko. Okay, I just have two more questions for our speakers who are connected online. Governor Wenzel, are you here? Are you connected? Okay, so...
oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you so much. What is and could, now you heard we have been talking about the engagement and work that we have been doing, the government of the Republic of North Macedonia with the World Bank. Maybe you can say more about the role of CEB in North Macedonia in providing support in terms of human capital investments, expertise, knowledge as well. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. And I have to say, first of all, that I'm very encouraged by the broad consensus from the ministers on the need to strengthen education. I think that is an important message because it's a commitment, a political commitment, and it's also a basis for international financial institutions such as the Council of Europe Development Bank, the CEB, but of course also our partners like the World Bank to cooperate and to work with the government. I think as Mr. Rigolini said, and he's absolutely right, when he says increasing, improving productivity or the human capital is a long-term, has to be a long-term policy objective. It takes sustained efforts and it's not a short-term thing. You have to invest and you have to invest long-term. And I think he's absolutely right. But it's not just an issue for the central government, but it's also an issue for city councils, for local governments, local administrations, to make sure that boys and girls go to school and have the access to education. I think that is very important. And I think the message here to the Minister of Finance, unfortunately he's not on this panel, is protect the education budget. If you may have short-term savings, but you might create long-term damages to the overall human capital. My point, however, is also, and I mentioned the brain drain. Now, you get a good basic education, but then what? Do you get a job? Do you get a job that is adequate to the level of education, to the level of your skills? If you want to take a higher university education and you go abroad because you cannot do it in your own country, will he or she, will that person come back? And will that person be able to set up its own business perhaps? So here, what I'm trying to say here is that we need this is human capital strengthening, maintaining and strengthening human capital is a multi-dimensional issue. It requires investments not only in education facilities, teachers, adequate teachers, teacher education, teacher formation, school buildings, school facilities, but also creating an environment, access to financing and health system that provides at least basic needs. All these things were touched upon, but I would like to highlight the need that this has to come together as a package. And that leads me then to my answer to your question: what can the CB do? Well, I think this is exactly what we have been doing all along since the country joined the CB in 1997. First, we provided financing to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises via partners in the country to give access to startups, to young entrepreneurs, to smaller enterprises, and to give them incentives to stay in the country and to develop the human capital for the benefit of the country. Second point is investing in education. Here again, we provide financing for education facilities and also for health sector. And here I have to say that we have some projects in the pipeline where we want to work more closely, more intensively with the government and the respective ministers. I'm sure that I will be listened to when I say that. We need to implement and to make sure that we have these projects coming online, to use that word, for the benefit of the people as soon as possible, because the current COVID crisis has shown how important the health sector is for the overall economy, and it's also important for making people stay in the country. When I look at the more recent OECD migration statistic, I see that over the last couple of years, on average, between 23 and 27, almost 30,000 people were leaving the country on an annual basis. This brain drain means a loss of human capital and a potential. And we know that people, once they have left, are not very likely to return to the country. And that is something we need to fight and we need to avoid to happen. Again, what the CB and other international financial institutions can do, and what we are doing, is to provide not only financing, but also the expertise and access to expertise for these sometimes challenging projects. We do not have to reinvent the wheels. We have a lot of experience in the international financial institution, the World Bank, the Council of Europe Development Bank, but I would encourage the country, the government, the ministers, and our colleagues in the ministries to use that expertise and to make best use of our support that we can provide. Last remark, the Minister of Foreign Affairs referred to the EU accession process, and here in that context also the rule of law is very important to attract foreign direct investors, but also the accession process also requires, in the sector of social infrastructure and social justice, more investment. And I would encourage again the government to make the best use of the IFI's support. We are there to serve you. This is why I guess you are a member of the institution. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Thank you for your presence here with us today, and thank you for the very good overview that you provided of the services that and the future cooperation that we could have in the future. Just a short question in terms of, because we are time limited, Mr. Patrinos, recently North Macedonia joined the World Bank Group Human Capital Project, which is the global effort to accelerate more and better investments in people for greater equity and economic growth. Could you explain more what achievements this initiative brings to our country? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and congratulations to the government of North Macedonia for joining the Human Capital Project. As you said, the aim of the project, one of the aims of the project is to put at the forefront of discussions the importance of investing in people, both health and education. And one of the benefits of the Human Capital Project is the measurement agenda, which includes the Human Capital Index. The index has been published twice, published in 2018 and then updated in 2020 before the COVID-19 pandemic. So we don't have estimates of the impact of the pandemic yet, but we do know that for North Macedonia, there was an improvement in the score between 2010 and 2020, meaning that the human capital of those young people today, once they reach the age of 18, has improved. So their productivity has improved. And these are important gains that were made that need to be protected through the crisis. And I think another benefit of the Human Capital Project is the sharing of information across countries, countries that have been successful at improving their systems, countries that have struggled, and the search for practices that are useful and can be shared across countries. So we bring together partners to look at the systems, to examine what worked in their context and to learn lessons. There's also a research program that delves into these issues to look at how policies were implemented. Earlier, you discussed the importance of political cycles and maintaining focus on human capital across political administrations. This is done through what we call the whole of government approach that looks at the importance of basic investments like those in children and people. And then the other benefit is that at our annual meetings and spring meetings, the World Bank and the IMF meetings, we bring together ministers of finance and the focal points of the Human Capital Project together to discuss this at a forum that usually discusses matters that are financial in nature. And we've managed to make the importance of human capital part of this global agenda. And I think the benefits will multiply greatly post-COVID-19 as we look at the experiences of different countries and share lessons across. And I look forward to participating in those discussions and to working with the ministers and with the government in the discussions of the Human Capital Project and what benefits we can bring to the table as we discuss post-pandemic plans and human capital strategies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that we are at the end of this discussion. I think also that we provided a lot of arguments why we need to preserve the human capital gains, especially in these difficult times during the pandemic still lasts. So we also provided a lot of arguments for the Minister of Finance why to decide to further invest in human capital. So I won't go with a conclusion. I will leave up that to the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Minister of Finance and the State Secretary. in order to do the closing remarks. I would just say thank you to my guests, and again, thanks for joining this discussion. Thank you very much.
Honorary guests, I would like to call on the stage the organizers of this conference. Please welcome the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Minister of Finance and the State Secretary, followed by the panel reporters to give their concluding words.
But also with a lot of experience in practical life, who know very well our economy regionally and also worldwide. So they were all the time with us, actually summarizing and following the panels. So the concept of this conference was that we leave something behind us, not just talking. Everything is recorded, and we want to summarize and take some overview, not only classical summary, but an overview of what was going on during the discussion, and come with some insights. Then later on we'll come out with a written document from the conference that will help the government on policy design, prioritization, and also in terms of the budget planning process and economic reform program, but also in terms of investment plan that the government has already promoted and an ongoing, but with a lot of insights from the private sector, international financial institutions as well, civic society. Now I would move forward as you have all in your agendas with us. Academic Abdulmenap Beceti was following and in charge of the first panel about the second part, which is about the global and regional development and prospects, challenges and prospects post-COVID. Deputy Minister of Finance, Dimitar Kovachevsky. He was on the second panel about macroeconomic policies and monetary policies in times of pandemic. Professor Trajko Slavevsky was in charge of panel 4 about this public and private investment and competitiveness. About panel 3, Professor Nikola Popovsky was in charge of the panel about the we had the good governance and social inclusion. The last two professors, they also were former Minister of Finance. And we have another one on audience, is Ms. Nina Gelovska. She's also with us in audience, my predecessor in the Ministry of Finance, so thank you for joining all the conference so far. Then panel 5 is, was about the smarter digital and green economy. As professor and also CEO of a bank in Mr. Grigor Bishev. Panel 6 about human capital and inclusive growth is Mr. Zoran Jovanovski, Vice President of Chamber of Commerce, and also owner of the one famous journal, Economic and Business in the country. As State Secretary in Ministry of Finance, she also joins these panels, so she was also all the time as management of Ministry of Finance following the conference. So, and online we have Professor Vladimir Grigorov from Vienna Institute for International Studies, who I also want to thank for joining this panel. After our intervention, discussion, he will make an overall summary of the discussion from this panel. And then I think once we agree, we might be ready to conclude the conference. So I hope this timeline is okay with all of us. So I will give the floor now, please, Professor Academic Ptolemena Vegeti, some of your views, insights from the discussion on the first panel, please.
Thank you, Minister Dr. Bessimi. Let me first of all again congratulate the Minister of Finance and his team for such a great organization of this conference, and very important, especially in the time that is organizing and the topic that we are treating there, especially how to find a way better recovering and better designing the better economic policy in state of that. I just already during the lunch proposed to the minister, I want to say here, you know, in public, that I think that better timeline to become traditional this conference, maybe next year to be a little bit earlier organized, maybe the last week of May and first week of June will be the best time when it's starting the fiscal calendar of the year, and of course to use that in that aspect. As Minister Bessimi yesterday during the opening speech mentioned the specific aspect of the conference, it's because it has come during pandemic time with a lot of challenges in economic recovery and more of that in sustained growth. As he mentioned, it was about 11% of GDP, or 1.2 billion euro support given to the citizens, to the private sector, to the health institution, to the security institution, and as well, it was a lot support, a lot amount, but we are still measuring how has been the effect. Some is much more satisfied, some less, but again, depends to the dioptry how we see that. There were, during the first session, a lot of very interesting discussion and remarks, were mentioned the global challenges, like mentioned by Vice President of the World Bank, Ms. Anna Biert, like climate changes, social security, world inequality, inequality distribution of vaccination, and security issues were mentioned also in that sense. So all these things making very difficult and unpredicted the environment for future prediction and forecasting the policy. Despite the pandemic during 2021, some countries were affected by rainfall and wildfire shocks. These are alarming, and the global policy makers need to focus attention on global climate change that already United Nations already underlined concern over this issue in their last report. These deviations from trends and long-run average are increasing more widespread, and climate change will accelerate the process. Of course, the effect of pandemic in Western Balkan countries were very differently, but according to the conclusion of many participants in the discussion, that still was not so worse as was expected, but differently from country to country in the, let's say, negative growth rate or recession. The special regional context of Western Balkan was underlined by RCC Secretary, Ms. Bregu, that special accent must be given to the youth, as they are the engine of the development of the region. Except the unemployment, especially among the youth, two other challenges were mentioned, corruption and brain drain at the Balkan region. And she sees the Open Balkan agenda as a solution for many pragmatically problems, such was the example with roaming system applied. Let's return a little back to the Republic of North Macedonia. Prime Minister Zaev was very optimistic, announcing very promising development through official statistics. Like was growth in the second quarter of the year, 13.1%. Historically decrease of unemployment rate at the level of 15.9%. Increase the foreign investment after NATO membership especially. Increase of export, etc. He underlines in particular the support from international financial institutions that North Macedonia took during this period and continuing still. The Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Gubi, was very focused on fighting corruption and unselective apply of the rule of law with a special accent to the corrupted justice system. He mentioned corruption as a pandemic phenomena, as an endemic phenomena that impact very low public trust to the institution. Of course, there is a different forecasting about this year of growth, and we are forecasting 4.1%. World Bank is forecasting 3.6%. Anyhow, will be about 4%. I may say the development issue is not only on the growth rate, and maybe the less for that. About the growth rate, we have to take care of the sustainability of growth, the source of growth, the factors of growth, and finally the model of growth that are much more important. These are our challenges that must be addressed, and sustained solutions should be found. The basic policy documents that Minister of Finance, Dr. Bersimi, with his team drafted were driven by this philosophy. Also, the government approved this package, and yesterday was confirmed by the Prime Minister Zoran Zaev. This policy document from Ministry of Finance were drafted through an inclusive process with many stakeholders, including the international institutions, business community, academia as well. The set of these documents contain to the Recovery and Growth Acceleration Financing Plan, Strategy for Public Debt Management, Strategy for Tax System Reforms, for the development of fiscal decentralization, Action Plan for Reduction of Informal Economy, Public Asset Management Plan, etc. All these policy documents must be finalized until the end of this year, maybe in the package of the budget for 2022. And above all, as was underlined by many others respected speakers in this session, The structural reforms must deepen, especially in strengthening the institution and court system, making market economy more functional, fighting corruption in all levels, reforming public administration, and finally making a better business climate for sustained and long-term investment. Smart and green economy must be part of the solution, especially for small and open economy like the one we have. We must change the mindset, of nomenclature about the budget line for education and health, not to treat them as expenditure, but as investment, as they are. A special accent must be focused on education and health system, in parallel incentive to increase the research and development. HDI, or Human Development Index, as a synthetic indicator, was underlined by the representative of UNDP yesterday. And investment in education and health will increase the human capital and make the labor market more convergent to the business needs, which is very asymmetrical at this moment. The program Learn Smart, Work Professional, the dual education system, it was also today mentioned, it started very well. Until now, I registered more than 90 classrooms with 1,400 students that will help a lot. So, at the end, I want to close this, let's say, summary with a sentence of IASOP, because it was first time to listen in directive insight from the institution, from the government representative, to be such a self-critic. And Prime Minister was very critical related to the corruption. So, but I will close this with a sentence of IASOP. After all is said and done, it's more said than done. Please start to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Academic Begetti, for this overview and the insights. I will immediately reflect, since I'm not taking notes, on your suggestions. So, on the timing, we had this on the spring, this scientific academic conference, and the policy papers now are published. We'll take this into consideration as well. Maybe we'll consider this to have at that time both events. So thank you for the suggestion. So, and also for the overview that you had, and we will have this in a written form and published once we complete the whole panel. So the next Deputy Minister of Finance, Kovačevski, please.
Yes, thank you. So first, I would like to share not only the summary of the second panel, but also one insight from the ministry. And as Minister Beșimi, as a great professional, he's a very also humble person. I feel that I should share that actually this great conference was practically his idea, and he devoted a great passion and a great deal of his time and energy to make it happen together with the colleagues from the Ministry of Finance. And this is really something for a big applause, and really he set standards together with the team of one conference organized for the first time, and I truly believe that this will be a tradition now as an annual conference as it is intended to be. So I want personally to congratulate to Minister Beșimi on really this great effort. About the macroeconomic policies and public finances in the post-pandemic times panel, practically this was the essence, I would say, of the 2 days conference. As here, three neighboring countries, North Macedonia, Kosovo, and Albania, through their finance ministers, shared the experiences of the time during the pandemic, after the pandemic, and the future plans, mid-term and long-term, together with an overview of the monetary policy as represented by Governor Bežovska, and insights from the international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. So practically all the panelists agreed that the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic were unprecedented, large, and they were immediate. So every country faced its own specifics due to different political, social, and structural differences, and the measures were undertaken in light of the pandemic crisis, but also influenced by the factors immanent for each country. The reactions to the crisis also have common denominators for all the T countries and for the international institutions. So the governments had to react fast due to the urgency and uncertainty of the situation, at the same time protecting the economy and building health and system capacities. Second, immediate and many unconventional fiscal measures were undertaken that was not common with the previous financial global crisis that happened 10 years ago. The reaction of the international institutions, the EU, the IMF, World Bank, EBRD, were very swift, immediate, and robust, which was not the case, again, 10 years ago. And the goals of the measures were to protect the people's lives, keep the economy alive, protect the economic welfare of the vulnerable, protect the jobs, maintain the structure of the economy in order to restart after the crisis and protect the banking system. And lastly, inject cash to the businesses as the crisis caused negative effects on the supply side, but also on the demand side due to the lockdowns and the broken supply chains. As Minister Besimi explained for the case of North Macedonia, the bill amounted to 11% of the GDP, consisting of 6 packages of 1.18 billion euros for 2020 and year 2021. The impact as calculated showed that without these measures, the Macedonian economy would plunge for 8.7%, and in this case we had, with the measures, 4.5% of GDP decrease. This is also valid for the other countries that were part of the panel, this was due to the undertaken measures of their governments, and the fall of the GDP was on a lower level than it was expected at the beginning of the crisis. 2021 started with high infection rates and continued governmental and fiscal support, but this time more targeted, based on the lessons learned from 2020. The measures were aimed again to protect the citizens and businesses, but also to support the growth of the resilient companies ready to invest in the future growth. The official statistics data showed that the countries weathered the negative economic development in 2020 and showed positive results based on all the KPIs. In the first 2 quarters of 2021, industrial production increased, exports increased, employment rates increased, GDP increased, and in the case of our country, the GDP in the second quarter of 2021 increased for 13.1%, largely due to the timely, robust, and targeted fiscal and monetary measures applied in the previous period. The response of the monetary policy, as explained by Governor Bezhovska, and the central bank was also swift, strong, and better balanced with the fiscal policy compared to the global financial crisis time. In the case of North Macedonia, the central bank reduced the key interest rate 4 times to a historic minimum of 1.25%, stood up with liquidity injections, and successfully fought speculations with timely and credible fact-based public communication. Banking sector was kept solid and capable to finance successfully the operations of the economy. The inflation rate, as stated, increased due to the developments on the demand side, mainly coming from increased oil prices and imported goods, and as it is seen as a temporary development expected to stiffen next year with the supply leveling demand. The IMF played also a crucial role and recently made unprecedented SDR allocation to finance the needs of member countries, from financing budget expenditures to fight the pandemic to creation of buffers in the reserves dependably on the needs of each country based on its fiscal buffer and fiscal status. Common for the countries, as stated on the panel, are the firm plans to focus in the midterm and on the long run on growth and fiscal consolidation at the same time. The plans have different names, but in essence they have many goals in common as they are: increase the capacity of the healthcare system and increase vaccination rates, as the higher the vaccination rates, the higher the economy recovery goes along with it; structural and fiscal reforms to build credible fiscal policy that will provide fiscal consolidation, consolidation of the public debt, provide fiscal buffers for future challenges and crises, increase capital expenditures in health system, infrastructure and green growth, accompanied with control mechanisms that will increase the efficiency and effectiveness of investment projects, invest in human capital at the same time facilitating training and subsidization of movement of labor force to the new Morris Island and developing industries and sectors, employ new innovation financing instruments for financing the growth by leveraging private investments in green and development funds along with the traditional sources of financing, implement structural reforms along with good governance to increase investor confidence, build political consensus on this agenda, and continue regional cooperation in light of the started cooperation initiative Open Balkans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitar. Now we move to the next panel about public and private investment and competitiveness. Professor Czajkowski, please.
Okay, thank you, Minister. This panel was moderated by Mr. Aris Vlachos, Chairman of the Hellenic Business Association in Macedonia. 9 presenters took part, out of which 3 representatives of the major chambers of commerce representing the private sector, 3 members of government, and 3 representatives from the international financial institutions, the EBRD, IFC, and the European Investment Bank. This summary condenses the views of the participants grouped according to their affiliation. First, private sector. Can they switch the? I don't have control of time.
Yes, so we make sure that we are
Okay.
on time. Thank you, Professor. So this also for other members, panelists here, is important. Thank you. Thank you for the note.
First, private sector. A slight distinction could be noticed with regards of the challenges emphasized by the representatives with a majority ownership consisting of small and medium enterprises on one hand and those representing big companies on the other. The former, small medium enterprises, point to the need for continued government support to those businesses still affected by the health and economic crisis in order to preserve people's lives, jobs, and their well-being. They count on both financial and non-financial support, including the following: fight against corruption, rule of law, reduction of grey economy, in order to create, as it was said, good environment for adaptation, survival, and recovery of the business sector. Businesses, here we mean the second group, big companies, have made plans for future investment in order to increase their competitiveness. They expect from the government, of course, to deliver low taxes, better transparency, efficient public administration, and timely fulfillment of government obligations towards the companies, meaning tax returns, subsidies, etc. Chambers of commerce highly value the role of institutions for providing assistance to the private sector. One of their priorities is further improvement of road and railway infrastructure in the country. Now we come to a government and its representatives. Naturally, government representatives were more inclined to focus on the measures undertaken so far in order to alleviate the negative consequences resulting from the economic crisis caused by COVID-19 pandemic. Financing of these measures in order of 11% of GDP, according to the Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs, Mr. Bitici, has contributed to significant increase of the public sector debt. In order to support future growth, the government has prepared an ambitious 7-year intervention plan for investment, which addresses in equal measure private and public investment, targeting sectors such as manufacturing, retail trade, tourism, food and energy, and also road, railway, and communal infrastructure. The goal is to increase local and overall competitiveness of the Macedonian economy. The government considers the current crisis as an opportunity for structural changes towards more energy efficient and greener economy, supporting investments in renewable energy sources such as photovoltaic, windmills, and gasification. In terms of transportation as a backbone for preservation of the existing supply chains in the region and Europe, on which our economy is reliant, significant efforts have been done to create so-called green lanes connecting the region of Western Balkans, including easing of procedures and protocols for transporters. Government representatives are aware of the issue of high level of public debt and expect that the necessary fiscal consolidation in the near future could be achieved following the medium-term public debt management strategy, document prepared by the Ministry of Finance, without neglecting the need to support economic growth. And the last group, consisting of IFIs, as follows. EBRD considers Macedonia as a country with very low level of investment risk. They point to further need to improve the visibility of the country for foreign investors. Also, investment in infrastructure seem to be crucial for regional cooperation and EU integration. The country should be commended, according to EBRD, for its commitment to the Paris Agreement with regards to the challenges of climate change. In order to reduce emigration of young people, it is important to invest heavily in improvement of integrity within our companies. Very good point. European Investment Bank representative has emphasized the need for creative thinking to streamline the funding, referring to the use of different instruments, such as two-dimension guarantee and the European Investment Fund, which is the special arm for risky investment. In addition to financial support, they also provide technical support and expertise. With regards to green economy and climate change, private sector companies should be educated and convinced for this kind of investment. Support is directed, but not limited to these areas. Green and digital transition, energy transition, and support of municipalities for waste disposal and waste water treatment. 1 minute more. IFC representative made a point offering private-public partnerships as a vehicle to contribute to the solution of the existing conflict from macroeconomic point of view between the need to rebuild the fiscal space on the one hand and the need for further investment on the other. The government could benefit from assistance to design a small number, according to the representative from IFC, of public-private partnerships in order to attract capital, know-how, and experience from foreign partners. Governments in general do not possess such expertise, as illustrated by the example of building new road infrastructure, which will take into account new forms of mobility in the future, like electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, etc. PPPs should be a signal to put the country on the investment map globally, was another point made by representative of IFC. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for this thorough presentation of all the aspects and organizing them in terms of the whether they come from the government, stakeholders, or development partners and business community. That's very important to have this perspective. And also now we move to the next panel, which was about good governance and social cohesion. Please, Professor Nikola Popovski.
Excuse me. Thank you, Minister Vesimi. I'm privileged to be part of this forum. I will try to summarize in 5 minutes the very challenging discussion about the good governance and social cohesion during the third session. And I have to say that there was 8 excellent speakers, 3 of them members of the government and 5 international representatives in Macedonia. Speaking about good governance is not an easy, because when we discuss a good governance, first we must distinguish what is governance, not only a good governance. Governance is a little bit older term than the good governance. It starts with the traditions and institutions according to which the government in the country is exercised, and also under it can be understood an organizational concept that shifts the administrative practices from the classical bureaucratic rule to professional and independent administrative rule. John Pierre, in his 2008 book, Debating Governance, Power, Government, and Democracy, writes that governance refers to sustainable coordination and coherence between a wide range of actors with different intentions and goals that may include political actors and institutions, interest groups, civil society, NGOs, and even transnational organizations. The definition of the concept of the good governance and its most important elements has been developed within the framework of the modern global institutions in the recent decades, mainly to describe the inadequate or unsatisfactory functioning of the government machinery or the need for the more efficient administration within the states. When we speak today about good governance, we speak about participatory way of governing that operates in a responsible, accountable, and transparent manner based on the principle of efficiency of the government, legitimacy, and consensus in order to promote the rights of individual citizens and also the public interest, and thus pursuing the political will for the material well-being of the society and sustainable development, with inclusion of social justice and social cohesion. Within the framework of the UNDP, the approach to define a good governance is a little bit more general. It consists of effective mechanism, processes, and institutions through which the citizens and groups articulate their interests, exercise their legal rights and responsibilities, and reconcile their differences. Anyway, the concepts of governance and good governors are too many differences in the world, and we have to choose some of them. But what is happening? We are in the middle of the pandemic. If we was not on a forum, if we was in an informal debate in some coffee bar, I should ask, give me a break. We are in the middle of the pandemic where the governance is dictated by the health sector. There is not a social government, social governance. The health sector is one who is even dictated what will happen in the society. And it is the result of this pandemic. Further, instead of social cohesion, we are promoting social distancing in the society worldwide. When we speak about good governance and social cohesion, we are doing something which is in the opposite way. We have to ask ourselves how to back on track. Let me stress, the one who tell us how to govern the society basically are the health authorities. I'm not against it, but we have to say that it is the case. They tell us who can work and who cannot work, who will be open, who will be closed, how, when, and who will be educated or will not. The same thing with the transportation, with the hospitality, with the tourism. Who can travel? Who can enter a state? Who can cross the border? If yes, under which conditions? Who can go to work? Who can go to forum? Who can go to a concert, musical concert? They govern the society now, health authorities, with hundreds of these kind of rules and others. Nobody knows how and when this will stop. But we have to find solutions to back on track as much as possible on the good governance and social cohesion. It is clear we need temporarily and transitional good governance and the new approach to a social cohesion until we are in the middle of the pandemic. What will be a role of the new technologies and which of them will be needed? A digital one or some other? If there was not COVID-19, this process it would be more evolutionary and more slower, but obviously we cannot expect it anymore. This will go further and faster than we was expecting. Let me just in 1 minute stress some points of the speakers. The Deputy Prime Minister Nikolovsky stated about corruption and rule of law, which became conditions sine qua non in the coming era of governance. Minister of Justice Marici stated, judiciary system with its efficiency and protecting the human rights by its digitalization as much as possible within the system. Minister of Interior Spasovsky made a very interesting statement that we need a high level of coordination of the society to face pandemic crisis and also elasticity in governing and in acting in order to deliver the basic public goods. The World Bank representative David stated, I'm citing, we all need vaccination and government assistance to prevent further increase of poverty in line of social cohesion. In parallel with investing in people, that is human capital, with a multi-sectoral approach. The president of the Hayek Institute from Vienna, Madame Barbara Kohn, who is also vice president of the Central Bank of Austria, put a lot of attention on a material and intellectual property rights, individual rights, which should be further promoted, taxation, which is, I'm citing, proper for the investors, and the further structural reforms, typical for someone who is on the chairman, as a chairman of the Hayek Institute. And finally, Ambassadors Geer of EU and Galloway of UK explained the need for a sustainable recovery during the pandemic, including Green Deal and digital agenda, which is necessary, and taking care for a further delivering of public services, employment and justice as a core for good governance and social cohesion. Final sentence, good governance and social cohesion are under pressure because of the pandemic, and we have and must to find a way out of it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Professor Popovsky, as you rightly pointed about the social cohesion and the social distancing and about the governance, the challenging, actually this conference helps us to look beyond COVID, to return back on a track, but not only where we were, but to build better, as it is famous now and trendy to mention it. So thank you for these points. So next we'll ask Professor Grigor Bishev about the Smart and Green Economy panel, actually digital and green economy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. First of all, let me express my recognition to the Ministry of Finance for excellent organization of this conference in these two days, and also especially to the Minister of Finance and Deputy Minister of Finance, like excellent conductors that designed and conducted this event these days. I really enjoyed these 2 days in a live debate of minds, and due to this, for me, it's very difficult to present summary in order to repeat their thoughts, but my intention will be to present the messages that I understand for this debate in smart and green economy. So the first message that I understand, for which there was consensus, at the current model of growth, like business as usual, is over, and the new model mainly will rely on 3 pillars: digital economy, green economy, and sharing prosperity for everybody. And these are so closely interlinked, not only among themselves, but also within all the economy, so that this is entering not only in economic life, but also in everyday life of its citizens on our planet, and actually on this, how efficiently policies and measures would be designed depend not only prosperity, but also well-being on the planet. And in this respect, USA and EU already defined their goals until 2050 to become climate neutral and digitalized economies. So this would require a big effort of total societies, of each economic agent. It's not exercised by the government, but mainly the main ingredients, as I understand for which there is consensus, are that to have friendly climate and digital policies, structural changes, huge legislative changes, reforms in tax system that will phase out current structure of subsidies and actually tax the polluting industries, huge investments by states, by international financial institutions and private sector. And European Investment Bank already announced that from 2021 they will not finance anymore any energy project that is based on fossil, and that until 2030, 50% of their portfolio will be directed to this type of projects. Currently, USA asset managing funds in this type of industry already account for 33% of their portfolio, and in Europe, European asset managing funds account for 40%. And the projection is that this ratio until 2030 will increase and most probably reach 70%. Due to this, managing with climate risk becomes very important, not only from the point of view of growth and saving the planet, but also from the point of view of soundness of financial sector. And this international framework creates framework also for all economies, also for Macedonia. And I would point out 2-3 points. It was presented also not only by our representatives, relevant ministries, but also by representative of IMF, that, and I think also World Bank, that Macedonia is leading with the action plan and strategy in this respect, and clear goals and actions are set up, and they are long-term goals which are beyond the term of office of this government. In this respect, consensus should be deepened. Plan is envisaging nature-positive solutions and investment, and here Macedonia would have some transitory period. First, the current structure of energy consumption to be substituted with natural gas, and then on long run to transform on more sustainable energy production. In the area of digitalization, goals are up to 2030, all government services to be digitalized, up to 90% to be online, and also share of organic production to be increased, and training and knowledge for IT and also for organic production to be increased. Funds from FAO, from IPART, and from international community to be fully utilized. Also, it's possible to issue green bonds in order to attract funds. And as I started at the beginning, it is not exercise of the government, but all citizens, especially private sector, and this would be the sector from which the investments should be bared at most, but also has the largest rewards. Thank you.
Thank you for these aspects raised about during this panel, which de facto one of the messages, since you talk about the messages, the way I understand the overall message is that the future is transformation, not only growth, but we go to the new reality. So thank you for that. Next, we come to one of the key growth factors, human capital, talking about all aspects. At the end, we come to ourselves. So please, Jovanovski.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I will start with one of my favorite quotes. Every good conversation starts with listening. So in that context, I believe that this conference was an excellent opportunity for a good conversation. Unlike the previous presenters, I covered the very last session, so my comments and the way I perceived the main messages are not neatly typed, so but I will point out those which I found of really great importance. I think that we heard and we agree with that investment in human capital adds to the skills, boosts productivity, supports the economic growth, and at the same time alleviates the inequality and poverty. So another sentence that resonated was that without human capital, all policies are meaningless. So basically, we have to have that in mind. But what I find of critical importance in the overall panel was the focus on the development of a human development strategy, because I think that is something that is really hard to do in a country which is heavily politically divided and politicized. So it was clearly pointed out that human capital development takes time, a lot of time, much longer than the regular four-year mandate of the politicians. It requires tough political decisions, so not very popular, and it requires continuity. So we should really think about it and think about the need to stop all the new beginnings that we face every few years. So it should be a long-term strategy, it is important, and it requires bipartisan effort. It should be also inclusive process at all levels, including the local levels. What we heard, and this is important because this strategy is an overarching aspect of all the segments that were individually discussed. What is important was that also mentioned inequality in the social services and the social infrastructure affects individuals' decisions to leave the country, whether they will leave the country or stay in the country. And that every fourth Macedonian believes, according to a survey, that investments in social infrastructure should be among the top priorities. With regard to the specific sectors that were covered, I think that maybe one of the key sentences said was that the vaccine saves the world. And I would just connect this with the sentence that was said yesterday, that vaccination policy is economic policy today. What I also liked a lot was the testimonial, which showed that in a very sincere way, we heard the doctor saying that the quality of the medical care does not depend solely or entirely on the medical equipment. It is the doctors, the nurses, everybody involved all together, the human capital. That's the human capital saving us, the rest of the humans not involved in this process from this pandemic. Another important point was that the Minister of Finance mentioned, Health mentioned that there were analyses done by the World Bank that to which they paid or not paid sufficient attention at the time, but the pandemic proved how important were those analyses done by the World Bank in identifying the weaknesses of the health sector. So when they started addressing specific segments pointed out in those sectors, they clearly saw the results of that. So one of the messages would be we should pay attention to what the international financial institutions are pointing out in their analysis. With regard to the, also there was the need for good coordination between institutions. It should not be the case only when we are facing a pandemic, it should be the case all the time. I found very interesting the messages sent with regard to the education system. We heard that 85% of the fiscal transfers from the government to education sector are used for payment of wages, compared to 70% in the world, which gives us a smaller room for investment in education. But the COVID pandemic also brought something positive, and that was that it helped to put investment in education into the focus of the society. So there is no doubt now, we now all understand how important it is to invest in education. And also one very strong message was basically by the teacher and the testimonial that everything is possible. Basically, if what she said was that if we ask the professors and the teachers in the schools to do online education before the pandemic, that would have been labeled impossible. So now we are starting to learn that it all depends on us and that impossible is basically possible. With regard to the cultural sector, the sector of culture, it's a strong message that without culture, our mental health is at stake. So we really have to think about the principle of solidarity that was mentioned, not only for the pandemic and the COVID situation, but also for the period after that, especially in situations where the artists are not able to perform with live audiences. Integrating the diaspora is an excellent idea. It means human capital beyond the country's borders can increase the pool of competencies wherever they come from to support our economic growth. So if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs manages properly this, this could be a great addition to what we are doing. I started with a quote. I will end with a quote, my addition to this discussion. And those are the words of Bill Gates. In the long run, your human capital is your main base of competitiveness. Your leading indicator of where you are going to be 20 years from now is how well you are doing in your education system today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jovanovski, for this excellent overall summary of panel 6. So actually, one of the factor that is limited, as in the economy, you're talking about limited resources,
for a V type of a recovery, maybe not in 1 year or in 2 years for some countries, but generally in a relatively short period of time. That's the first point. The second point is that it doesn't really change the problems that countries are facing, economic, political, and so on. It does, and also from what I heard that has been reported from your discussion, it appears to me that by and large, these are the issues and tasks that either have been known for a while or would have been there irrespective of the pandemic. So, for instance, green economy, energy efficiency, climate change, and all that is a task that should have been tackled and needs to be tackled irrespective of the crisis. So these are, so that's my second point, the task of developing, for instance, Macedonia or the region in general and so on, everything that has to do with the institutional setup, with the policy setup, with the structural issues and so on. These are tasks that have not been brought in by the epidemic, nor they have been changed in dramatic ways by the epidemic. So that's my second point. The third point I think is important is that the epidemic is different from ordinary economic or financial crisis because it is a public bad. This is an example where essentially we have generalized externalities or public bad significant by the public because of that governing authorities fail, which is of the underlying social welfare function, then in circumstances, the government needs to be on everybody's side so that the increased let's say, interference by the government, which may bother a lot of people, enterprises and so on, is almost necessary is in these kind of circumstances. And then the real question is whether it is, to repeat, benevolent, meaning that it is takes into consideration everybody's interest. We see, unfortunately, in many countries, in not just in the Balkans, but in other places, where this is not the case, where the government actually is preferring one or the other interest group, or generally, or even the social group, old rather than young, or whatever may be the rich rather than poor, and so on. So this is really a challenging moment for the public institutions and for the governance structures in general. So that would be my point number 3, I think. But then, of course, you want to think about what is needed given the challenges specifically in the Balkans, and including obviously Macedonia. When you think about that, I think there are probably a few challenges I could mention. One, I think, very major one is demography. The region is getting to be rather old and also to be losing population either to natural reasons or simply due to outward migration. That's, I think, probably the largest problem that the countries are facing. The epidemic doesn't necessarily help in that respect because it creates an incentive for people to try to additionally, if you will, look for other places in the world where they could strive. The other problem is that this is an underdeveloped region where, while you may want to have, shall we say, enlightened economic policy, you still need to have a lot of work in areas where a less developed country will have comparative advantages, and these comparative advantages are not necessarily going to be in the most advanced industries. So it takes a while for a country to jump. So again, I would say it would be important get as many people as possible employed and open as possible. These are very small economies, so hoping to internationalize, meaning rely on connections with the outside world. It is certainly a problem, not only in Macedonia, but in other countries, that this part of the world is outside of European integrations, and that slows down the development of these countries. That, I think, hope should be remedied. So thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope you heard what I said. It's not the best possible link that I've had.
Thank you very much, Professor Gligorov. At the beginning, we had some technical challenges, but we sorted them out. So we are in time before you, still while you are online with us. I'll ask, because we go behind the schedule about 10 minutes. So State Secretary Jelena Tast, maybe some of your observation in terms of how, the follow-ups, and then I will finalize this, since we have said most of the things about the conference. Please.
Distinguished participant, dear ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking our panelists and speakers for excellent discussion. So at the very end, I will be very short and just say that there are three musts for pursuing sustainable growth. First is the green agenda. We must focus on it. The second is digitalization process. We must use digital knowledge to attain social and economic development. And the third is investment in human capital. We must put the people's well-being before everything. We are all agree that when defining policy, we have to have in mind this trio. Thank you once again for being with us 2 days, and I wish you all stay in good health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena, being very effective on the messages. So When we started the idea, the initiative, there were many challenges, whether we can make it or not. We had the strong belief that the situation, and it is a must to continue forward. So I really want to take these few minutes at the end, just acknowledging and thanking all of you for making this initiative idea happen. So we made the first success in terms of the debate. So the challenge is we should make this success sustainable and enrich it every next step by having such debates. So as it was mentioned, so I'm not going to rephrase because I didn't remember it, from say to do and from do to say, something like that. We are going on the next stage on doing things. So these observations that you made in a written form, we will share also with the moderators and panelists. So, and the next days during this week, once they are completed, we will formalize in a document which will be published, but also not only published, actually we will present this to the government and we'll redraw them in terms of concrete steps so it can be reflected in the budget for 2022. Of course, in terms of prioritization and what are available sources, will be some optimization, but definitely will be part of the policy making. That is what is the concrete result of this conference. I cannot conclude this because without mentioning those who were not in the panel, but will do this, what we are talking here today with us still is the Director of Development Bank, Mr. Kirill Naumov. He was yesterday also with his colleagues, directors from other agencies that will implement these instruments. And I want to thank ambassadors who were present here today, distinguished panelists, guests, and also would like to say, to say a big thank to the former ministers. And of course, last but not least, as I mentioned, all these are a success. If we want to make a success, it's not going, being alone. Actually, I will rephrase a quote that I heard, and it is very simple and very powerful. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So this initiative is not doing things just fast. It's doing things in a long term. So since we were all together, I think we have a bright chance to go together and successfully far, and also not taking credits by one or the other, but together. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about our common future and all challenges. So once again, thank you for this panel and summarizing this. Thank you for being with us here. And Skopje Economic Finance Forum will continue with organizing the events of different kind, not only the annual conference, but other forms that will create us a more fluent platform for discussion and constructive debate and innovative solutions. So thank you very much. And thanks to all of participants who were following us online. And I will start applauding to all of you for making this happen.
Thank you for your attendance.